Hello.
Hi, good evening.
Good
Nice to see
evening.
you.
It's great to see you. Thank you for having me.
Of course. And I'd like to just welcome all of our guests here at our happy hour. Good evening, everyone. My name is Sam Sifton. I'm an assistant managing editor at the New York Times and the founding editor of NYT Cooking. I'm here with the food writer and recipe developer, Yewande Komolafe, and I'm a huge fan. So it's going to be difficult for me to maintain my usual tough stance on questioning. We're going to have a little chat, share a beverage, take some questions from all of you, and have a good time for the next little while. I just want to say, you can submit questions at any time during this event in the live chat section on YouTube. And please note, this event is being recorded. Yewande, welcome.
Welcome. Thank you. I'm welcoming you. I love it. I'm like, welcome.
How is your lockdown going?
You know, it's going one day at a time. I think that's about all we can do, right? It's really hard to plan, obviously. So yeah, we're just taking it one day at a time. But it's been okay.
How is your cooking going?
Cooking's been interesting. Ingredient shopping's been interesting, so cooking's been interesting. I think there's like the need and the necessity to sort of just go with whatever the grocery store has at this point. And so that's what I've been doing a lot of.
I think that's what a lot of us have been doing a lot of, and I think it does interesting things to recipes, right?
I agree.
As a recipe developer, you're very intentional in your work, attending, it seems to me, as a huge fan, attending to a kind of balance of flavors and textures and colors. Mm-hmm. But we can't really do that now. How does that make you feel that people are hacking your recipes and making them into things that are a little different?
I love that you use the word hacking because I think it's a positive thing. So I think of recipes as guidelines, and I think of recipes as like boundaries. And as long as you understand the guidelines and the boundaries and the fundamentals, you can mess with it as much as you want. So please, like, do hack it.
Well, talk a little bit more about that, because one of the things that you and I have discussed, and I'd like to discuss with our audience this evening, goes to that very thing, and it's like the enemy of authenticity, or put another way, authenticity is kind of it's like a joke. It's
not a great word. Yeah. I think, rightfully so. Yes, like authenticity is something that should be discussed, but I don't think that we should all be held to this standard of authenticity, because to me, at least, I feel like it's relative. Like, is my cooking authentically Nigerian? I don't know. Like, what does that mean? My mom makes a Nigerian recipe different from the way I make it, from the way my aunt makes it. And so, like, what really is authenticity? I think the person that can answer that question should actually maybe put a slide into the comments and, tell me exactly what authenticity is.
Yeah.
Because I'm trying to figure it out. I think it's authentic to my experience. Like my cooking, my recipes are authentic to my experience. And my experience is that I lived in Nigeria and I moved here and my parents live in Berlin. And so I think that it's my cooking is like a summary of all of those experiences.
Which is probably why it's so delicious. It's also why we turn to you to write our Essential Nigerian Recipes package. Can you talk a little bit about how that process went for you in thinking about that?
Yeah, that was an exciting process. It was a really I learned so much about my own cuisine, which was it was so great to experience that. It was really hard to pick 10 recipes that are like essential, it was given such a huge title, like Essential Nigerian Recipes. And so in thinking about them, Nigeria is like a huge country. It's full of different people who are from different ethnic groups. And I really wanted to honor all of that. And so I tried to think of recipes that would like recipes rooted in places. And so in thinking about like creating the recipes, I was looking for recipes as it relates to a place, because I really wanted to make sure that I covered as much ground as I could. And so I talked to family members, I talked to friends who were from other parts of Nigeria. I also really did say in the piece that like because my experience is rooted in Southwestern Nigerian cooking, like I'm looking at things from like a Southwestern Nigerian lens. And so I think that really that helped root me, and like rooting myself in a place like that helped me sort of like take a step back and like view the broader story of the food that I was trying to tell.
Which was a story you told so beautifully. To bring it back to where we started, I think of your recipe for jollof rice, which of course in other parts of West Africa would be made differently. It's like one of those great,
I mean, just even other parts of Nigeria is made differently,
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those dishes where actually the best recipe and the most authentic recipe is the person's mom's, right? Or grandmothers or cousins or what have you. It's a great way to start fights, but also
absolutely.
to kind of talk about food, right? And talk about the story of food, rooted, as you say, in place. Can since we've been talking about your experience and how it's informed your cooking, can you talk about leaving Nigeria to come to the States, and how your cooking developed when you came here?
Yeah, of course. So I moved from Nigeria here to the United States specifically to go to university. I got a degree in biopsychology that I never used. And I went.
Let's go back. You got a degree in biopsychology?
Yeah, biopsychology.
Okay, I gotta,
it's a long.
I had a whole thing with I didn't know this going in, but if someone said biopsychology, everybody's got a drink.
Yeah.
So
oh, okay.
Let's.
Here we go.
Let's. Cheers. Okay.
Okay.
So you got a degree in biopsychology. Has that
never used it as you do with a college education? I went straight to culinary art school because that's initially what I wanted to do. But I think coming from a country like Nigeria with parents who both were super highly educated, their idea of what a degree looked like was going to college and getting a degree. But anyway, so I went to culinary art school after that and worked in restaurants afterwards. So my restaurant experience is primarily pastry. In pastry kitchens, I started out in like French fine dining, worked up and down the East Coast. I ended up in New York and loved it here because it's such a vibrant city and reminds me of Lagos, the city where I'm from. And I ended up at Milk Bar, Momofuku Milk Bar. And while I was there, I worked in recipe development because at that time, our menu just like changed every day. And so recipe development was a huge part of what we did. And I think it was there that I really could understand that recipes are boundaries. And my like classic French training had been like, this croissant recipe, you never change it. It's been in our family for like 1,000 years. Don't change it.
Almost got you there.
I know.
I thought it was going to be me swearing.
I'm talking kitchen, so
yeah.
But But yeah, so at Milk Bar, it was like, why not? Like, why don't we add kimchi to the butter and make a kimchi croissant and, fold that into the layers of the dough? And so I think the way I thought about recipes really expanded there. And I really understood that once you understand the boundaries, like you could do whatever you want within the recipe, as long as you keep those boundaries in place. And so after that, I worked in test kitchens, went to magazine test kitchens, and now I do a lot of work on cookbooks. I work for the Times, of course. But yeah, that's sort of that's a condensed version of my food story.
Well, a really nice story as well. Can you talk? I want to ask. Actually, I want to stay with the restaurants for a minute. Can you talk about your experience in fine dining restaurant kitchens? I think it's an immigrant-rich environment, often, but it's also, as your almost potty mouth indicated, they also can be quite rough places.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
I would imagine that they could be quite rough places for women, for people of color, for everyone. But
all of those things, and I think that so restaurants did a few things for me. I did want the training because at that time I felt that it was important. But I worked as an undocumented immigrant, and restaurants, to be honest, were a great place to hide at that time. And so I felt a solidarity with the other people working there who were also undocumented. That I don't think that there was always the ability to move up, which is and I think that restaurant work is just really hard on your body. And so I never really saw it as like an ultimate goal. Like I didn't go in thinking I want to work in restaurants or I want to own a restaurant. I went in thinking more I needed to learn very specific things, and that was my approach to it. But it was tough. I mean, some of my hardest years that that I'm writing about now in my cookbook
nice.
are some of my restaurant years. So absolutely.
I want to ask you about your road back to savory, but can you talk a little bit about your cookbook? Because I'm sure everyone here on the call is going to want to get one as soon as they possibly can. I know I want one in galley form.
Definitely. So my cookbook is on classic Nigerian cuisine, kind of playing on the essentials, the 10 essentials, and sort of using like a broader brush to really have a look at what else constitutes classic Nigerian cuisine. And so it's based in Lagos, and it's rooted in Lagos because that's a city where I'm from. But Lagos is also a place where you can experience most of the food of Nigeria, because it's a transient city. It's a city where a lot of people from other parts of Nigeria move to and move through. And so the food scene there is really, it's exciting and it's rich and it's diverse, and it's a great space to talk about the food of the country, focusing on Lagos.
It's, I didn't realize this until just now, but in a weird way, and I'd like you to talk about this, the last city that you were out and about in was Lagos, because you kind of returned to you were in Lagos with your family and then returned essentially into the pandemic.
Yeah.
That's so interesting. Can you talk a little bit about that, about coming back and what that experience was like?
Of course. I mean, it was chaotic. I think I've settled down, and my family has settled down a bit more now. But coming back at first, it was like we were out and about and traveling, like just trying to settle back down and center myself again, and physically root myself in Brooklyn again. But there was almost no choice but to be rooted in Brooklyn because we couldn't really move around. Right. I think one thing that's interesting is cooking in a pandemic is somewhat similar to what I was doing in Nigeria, in the sense that sourcing food and going with what you have is sort of what we do. My parents have like an amazing backyard, and they grow things in the middle of the city, in their backyard. And so there's a lot of sourcing right from the backyard, like,
Oh,
and you kind of just go with whatever you have, and it's similar in that way. I could draw like a thread and say like my cooking in Brooklyn right now is pretty similar to what I was doing in Lagos.
so let's talk about your cooking. I wanted you to trace your way from the pastry station back to savory.
Mm-hmm.
I find that I mentioned earlier that one of the things that I find so lovely about your recipes is that kind of balance of color and texture and the like. They're very beautiful dishes.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Does that derive from pastry, or does that derive from a personal aesthetic, or does that derive from something else? Why is your food so damn pretty?
That's I think a little bit of everything. I think honestly, as what pastry gave me was trying to approach recipes in a very scientific way. And so it's actually harder for me to develop a savory recipe, but that's like the challenge, right? And that's where I'm like pushing myself to go in that direction, because I can follow a recipe. I can follow it to the T, and it will come out consistently every single time. But it's I have to reach to sort of go with the flow. Like that's not who I am innately. And so I think in developing a recipe, I try to think of balance, and I love all the ingredients to be in harmony with each other. And so I think the colorful nature of the recipes could be coming from that. It could also be coming from, I don't know, I grew up in a city with a lot of vibrant like colors, and I feel like the fruits and the vegetables there are just greener, and tomato is redder. So it could also be coming from there. Thank you for saying that.
I'd like to ask you, I guess, how recipe development and reporting work together. You mentioned the work that you did for Essential Nigerian Recipes in attempting to use a wide lens on Nigerian cooking, which is Nigeria is such a large and diverse nation. How do you balance the reporting aspect, talking to relatives, to home cooks, to people who know what they're talking about as regards a particular dish, with the development of a recipe that talks to that experience? You're not a stenographer. You're developing a recipe off of the reporting that you're doing. And times recipes, if they succeed, and I think they succeed because they're based in reporting. But I'm interested in the experience of a developer working with reporting to come up with a recipe.
Yeah, so that's a good question. I think that again, it's something where I let my experience lead me. Part of my experience was that I had to keep myself and who I was hidden for a very long time as an undocumented immigrant. I think that I didn't see a lot of the stories that I was experiencing and the stories that I saw other people that I knew experience highlighted in media. And so when I report, I try to do due diligence to everybody's stories and make sure that everybody has a voice in that story, because I think it honors them. I think that it's really important not to write people out of their stories, especially if you're handling that work. I think that there's a certain amount of trust that's given to you as a reporter, And I think it's really important to honor that. And so it's definitely something that I'm very conscious of, but it's something that I take very seriously.
Yeah, I think it's the most important thing that that we show our work, as it were, that we make sure that when we're telling the stories of recipes or foods or of cuisines, that work is shown. I gotta just jump in with a question from out in the world, because it's blowing up on social media. Everybody sees this little chair behind you hanging off the counter. Everybody wants to know about your daughter. Everybody wants to, like, where's she at? And the question that comes up again and again is, what are your go-to family meals with a little one at home?
Oh yeah, that's been fun. That's been fun. So she was in Nigeria with us in February. And so she really got to experience Nigerian food there in Nigeria, which was amazing. And I'm trying to like sustain that and just make sure, because this is food, whether she likes it or not, she's going to be exposed to. And so a lot of, I haven't done the chilies yet, but it's a lot of flavors. She loves turmeric, she loves like ginger, she loves really fragrant things. But yeah, I'm trying intentionally to like expose her to a lot of Nigerian food, because I missed that for a long time.
Yeah, it'll be interesting when you start bringing the peppers online.
I think, build it slowly. Like today she tried like red pepper flakes. And she like, she coughed a little bit, but she
no one's calling that abusive.
Yeah.
You just gotta,
she'll be fine.
She'll be fine. I'm going to ask another question from the audience, and then we'll get back to you and me talking. Pamela asks, what is a recipe you love, but that was the most challenging to make well and then make your own?
Well, that's a good question. I'm obviously working on my cookbook right now. And the last time I was in Nigeria, I had moi moi, which is a steamed bean cake. And so dehydrated beans are refreshed by soaking, blended into a puree, and like all these flavors are added, onions and fish and whatever you have around the house, and then it's wrapped in a leaf and steamed. So it's similar to a tamale, but it's ground bean. And so the proportion of liquid in that recipe is so hard to figure out, because I've seen it made like once or twice, and I've made it once, but it's like just trying to figure out like how much water do you add to the blender? It's like, I don't know, you just add it until it blends, and but that's a recipe that I really love, but I've found it difficult to recreate specifically here.
You're going to crack the code. That leads me into an area that we've also talked about in the past, you and I, which goes to like what happens to a nation's cuisine, a region's cuisine, when it travels a great distance. There's a big difference with cooking Nigerian food in Brooklyn and cooking Nigerian food in Lagos. That doesn't make Nigerian food in Brooklyn any less delicious, but it changes it, right?
Yeah, it does. And it's something that occurred to me working on this book, is that the food that I cook as Nigerian food, it's stuck in my memory as a 16-year-old. So
oh wow.
So it's like, so like I grew up in Nigeria in like the 80s and early 90s, and so that's the food that I know as like classic Nigerian food. But like the food in Lagos has moved on so far away from there. So I think that sometimes the food that we cook as immigrants are like stuck in a certain time period, and it has moved a little bit, because there's a little bit of substitution, especially now. If I can't find West African yams, I'll use sweet potatoes. And so it moves in that direction with substitution. But for the most part, it's like I'm cooking like food that my grandmother cooked, maybe like
Oh,
maybe the cook. Yeah, you know, like I go to I go to Nigeria, I go to Lagos and like eat at a fine dining Nigerian restaurant, and like my mind is blown, like, oh my God, like how do they do that? You know, but I'm like over here with like jollof rice. You know?
that's really interesting. But you know, but I love that you're basically your grandmother cooking.
Yeah, I'm like I've become my grandmother.
That's really funny. But that's true of you cooking Nigerian food with a, you know, capital N, capital F. Your cooking, the cooking that is true to you and your experience is, of course, it's not a Nigerian grandmother's food. It's informed, as we've discussed already, by your time in pastry, by your travels in the US. What about American cuisine has affected your cooking, if there's such a thing as American cuisine?
Yeah, I think making the connection between West African food and ingredients and American cuisine. So part of my time as a chef, I spent in Atlanta, I spent in Birmingham. And really, it was there that I started to make connections like, oh, wow, I remember this dish growing up. You know, I know that we also take a big pot of greens and like stew it and cook it down. There were several dishes which I can't remember right now, but there were all these connections like, oh wow, these cowpeas, like I remember seeing this in Nigeria, you know. I never really saw collards, but like the cooking techniques and the cooking processes were also familiar to me. And so there's a lot about American cuisine that relies on West African ingredients because of the history of America. And so making those connections has been really fascinating to me throughout my culinary experience.
It would be, I hate to assign more work to you because I know you got a book to do, fame is building and all that stuff. But that's totally a story that, you know, that's something that we should look into. I mean, we've explored it in different ways, but doing so through the lens of a cook and reporter of West African descent, looking at Southern cuisine, African American cuisine, directly is related.
Yeah.
It is a kind of cool thing to do. So
back to your
next week.
Okay, got it. Like next week,
1,500 words, 4 recipes.
No problem.
It'll be good.
Super easy. Yeah, super easy.
Could you style the photographs as well?
Of course, I do that all the time.
Great. Oh, and the pandemic is going on, so we don't have a shooter. We don't have a photographer.
So I have to shoot as well.
Yeah.
Darn.
Is that okay?
Yeah. I mean, I guess I could do that.
Okay.
but wait, back to your question, what happens to a cuisine when it travels? I mean, American food, you know, American cuisine, it's traveled, and this is what happens to it essentially.
I completely agree. I mean, we are a nation of immigrants, and every, you know, classic American food stuff you can think of came from somewhere else and became something different here. I had a really good conversation and interview with the pizzaiola, the pizza chef Mark Iacono, who runs Lucali, also in Brooklyn.
Yeah.
And he grew up quite near where I grew up in Brooklyn. He's Italian American. He'd never been to Italy. He went to Italy and he really disliked the food.
Interesting.
And he disliked the food because he like the pizza. He's like, I'm not even sure that's pizza. Like, it's like raw.
Well,
I don't get it.
That's so interesting.
And all of a sudden, in talking with him, I realized that actually, maybe it's wrong to call him an Italian American chef. Not that anyone does. They call him a pizza god, but he's cooking out of the Italian American larder. But maybe it's like the American Italian larder, you know? Because it's been completely changed by its, I don't know,
by his experience here, that you know, by the experience of the people who ended up here. Absolutely.
And to return to a point that we raised earlier, to the ingredients that are available here.
That are available. Yeah. Yeah.
Like our tomatoes are different. The breadcrumbs.
Then yeah, and so we make all these substitutions, but yeah, it does change the recipe or the cuisine,
Do we
and it evolves into something different.
And do we agree that that's a good thing?
Change is good. Yeah, change is constant, and change is good. And like whether we accept it or not, change is constant. So, is it a good thing? It depends on your palate, right?
Yeah, yeah. I'm going to turn to our audience and ask, hey, if you have any questions for Yewande, please put them into the live chat there on YouTube, and we'll get to them. Otherwise, I got like 8 million questions for her. I can talk to her because
I have a question for you. I have a question for you. Yeah. So
Whoa,
I'm always I'm always interested in whether it's like a farmer or a chef or like people who are moving the food conversation forward. I'm always interested to know how. So what are you doing to move the food conversation forward?
Well,
how are you moving the food conversation
I'm having a pretty
forward?
good conversation with you.
That's a start.
What I'm trying to do. I think, I got this new job.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much. And it allows me to do something that I've always wanted to do, and which I do or try to do in my work every day, which is to make sure that people understand that food is a cultural product that's really, in some ways, it's no different from fine art or poetry or literature. Like, I want to discuss it that way, understanding that it's rooted in craft. We learn skills, we execute the skills, you make the croissants every day, that's a craft. But when you start messing with it and saying, I'm going to put kimchi in it, trying to tell a story, then you may be elevating it to art, insofar as you're creating a thing that makes a comment on how we live in our lives and how we relate to the culture in which we're living. And I want to do that kind of journalism more. I want to encourage that across the New York Times. I want to make sure not just that I'm staying true to telling people stories and honoring, as you say, honoring the creators that we're working with, but making sure that you get to do so as well, and that we get to continue to publish food journalism that matters, that moves the conversation forward.
Yeah.
Okay, an anonymous question. I don't know why this is anonymous.
What?
Are there any techniques or ingredients that you've used from other cuisines to make a new twist on Nigerian food? Have you put kimchi in your jollof rice? That's the question.
That's the question. I have not, but I'm also learning about my cuisine not being in Nigeria. And so sometimes my approach to it is as someone who is curious as hell, and is as someone who's curious and wants to see what I can do with it. So spice wise, it's like, I might not be using it in the typical way that it's used in Nigeria. So like pepper soup spice. Yep. I've always known pepper soup spice as this blend that I get from the market that's already ground, but approaching it as like a culinary professional, I wanted to know exactly what was in that spice blend. And so I sought out all the spices, and now I have these like little bags of individual spices that I can taste. And, I'm like, oh, this would be really good in a creme brulee. Like, is that something that a Nigerian or, is that something that like pepper soup spice is typically used for? No, but like this particular spice would be great with butter, or it would be great as a cracker, And so sometimes I just approach food that way. It's like, what else can I do with this? Like, I know it's supposed to be savory, but can it be sweet?
Can it be sweet? Can we just stick with that spice blend for a minute? Because this is something that comes up a lot in discussion, or it's come up a lot with me. I grew up in Brooklyn. I'm from Brooklyn, which means that I grew up eating a lot of West Indian food.
Okay.
And there's a curry blend, like a Jamaican curry blend, that I use a lot. And it's,
what's in it? Do you know?
It's heavy on the turmeric, you know.
Okay.
It's turmeric forward.
Okay.
And it's warm and it's delicious and it's a particular thing, and it gives I don't know, it makes food taste like Brooklyn to me. And I'm so interested in how we communicate that kind of thing to our readers. I was in, like, I don't ever want the New York Times to be in the business of recommending, you know, brands, right? But I had the best smoked salmon of my life on the Maka Indian reservation outside of Seattle on the peninsula there, in Nia Bay. And I was like, dude, what did you do to this? Like,
what's in here?
What's in this? And he gave me this whole malarkey about it was like, you know, it's handed down from the forefathers. And then I bought it totally. And then he cracked up and showed me a Lowry's season.
Oh my God.
And
that's awesome.
It's awesome.
That's awesome.
It's awesome.
You know, but part of it is also the experience. Like, food is an experience, or it can be an experience. It doesn't always have to be, but it can be.
Totally. But I think we should give each other permission to fall in love with a Lowry's or a particular spice blend or whatever, right?
Absolutely. Because not everybody, you know, toasts and grinds their own spices, and, you know, you don't have to. If you have time, sure, do it. But
yeah. Okay, so Wadza is speaking for many who are in New York City listening to us. Is there a great place what's the best Nigerian restaurant in New York City?
Ooh, the best Nigerian, the best. Ooh, that's hard. Okay. I can tell you where I go when I don't want to cook. And it's this place in Fort Greene called Buka. It's Buka. And they make a pretty good variety of Nigerian dishes. There are a few other places that I can't quite remember the names right now, but honestly, like, the best food is just go to someone's house who is Nigerian and have their mom cook for you. You know?
I agree.
Yeah.
So we got a couple thousand people who are going to be knocking on your door in just a second.
I know.
I just posted your address in the live chat. One of our listeners, Scott, asks a really interesting question. Hearing you mention kimchi croissants makes me wonder if there are any fermented ingredients or dishes in common to West African cooking.
Yeah, so many. There's a lot. I've been doing a lot of, with the time that I have now, I've been doing a lot of fermenting. And so I'm realizing that a lot of our grains are fermented first to aid digestion, which I think is just mind-blowing and brilliant. And, you know, there's a lot of flavor building comes from fermentation in Nigerian cooking. And so an ingredient I can think of is fermented locust beans, which they're like an umami punch. If you've ever had like a fermented black bean, it's pretty similar. It's not salted, but it's that same umami rich flavor. I'm writing a piece about palm oil, and I just learned that, like, palm oil seeds are fermented first before pressing the oils out.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Which I didn't know that either. There's a lot of, I know, which is amazing. There's some porridges with like millet and corn porridges that are made by fermenting the grains first. So there's a lot of fermenting. In fact, when I first moved here, I think the cuisines that I was more interested in and more drawn to were not American cuisine. It was, I wanted Indian food and I wanted Chinese food because those flavors also just reminded me of home.
Stacy, one of our listeners, asks, and this is interesting because you brought up palm oil. Will your cookbook include substitutions where possible for those who live outside of large metro areas?
Yes, substitutions, and also where to find some of these things. I just had a friend ship me like a whole box full of Nigerian ingredients, and I know that not everybody can do that. So yeah, definitely substitutions, and also just where to find some of these things.
What has been, this is a question from me to you. Mm-hmm. What has been your lockdown treat? Have you done anything? Have you ordered
lockdown
anything?
Treat. Ooh, lockdown treat. Maple syrup. Maple syrup.
Tell me more.
I know. So I have spent several summers in Vermont. My husband is from like way upstate New York, on the border of New York State and Vermont. And so we've spent some time in Vermont, and we have this one farm that we love. It's I think it's like the best maple syrup in the world. But I'm not going to name them because I almost want to keep it to myself.
That's fair.
Yeah,
that's
but
fair.
Just the complexity of like the flavors is what gets me, and I just haven't tasted anything like it. And so yeah, we've ordered like tons of maple syrup and honey too. I'm super interested in honey and the varieties of honey out there, and so I've ordered a lot of honey.
So you're getting Vermont maple syrup and Vermont honey.
And well, the honey's from, I got like a really great box from Ethiopia recently.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. It's from a company based in Brooklyn. So
for me, it's been oysters.
Oysters.
Yeah, I'm locked down. I live on the east end of Long Island, and there are a lot of
that makes sense. Yeah.
A lot of oyster farms out here, and they can't ship to restaurants in New York, so they're doing. So it's great. I can call in.
What a fancy lockdown.
Isn't that great?
I love that.
Yeah, I call it in, and then there's a bag of 24 oysters on my.
That's incredible.
And I feel like I should be wearing a top hat and a monocle.
That's incredible.
Yewande, this has been such fun talking to you.
This has been really great.
I love doing it always, and doing it in front of a crowd is just great. I have to ask you before we get to the end, what you're going to be doing for dinner tonight, because we're in your kitchen and it doesn't look like you've got a mise en place.
I'm not making anything. I had to test a recipe today that took literally all day, so I'm not cooking. That's my dirty little secret, is that for myself, I don't really cook a lot. Like, I test recipes and then I'm done. I don't want to be in the kitchen anymore. So my husband's probably going to make dinner. Bless him.
Bless him. I have to go make dinner for my family because.
What are you making?
I think I'm going to make a kind of like ragu of ground beef and some mushrooms and the tofu that you've convinced me I need to eat every day because it's so delicious when you write about it. And then some dobenjang, the Chinese broad bean, fermented broad bean.
Nice.
Soy sauce and sesame oil and rice. I hope it'll be delicious. We'll see.
That sounds delicious.
It's just another night on lockdown. Folks, thank you for joining us for today's happy hour. This event is part of a series of digital events the Times is producing to help readers understand and navigate the world we find ourselves in today. Parents, I'm a parent. Yewande's a parent. Next Wednesday, May 27, Jessica Gross, a Times editor, and her special guest, Pooja Lakshman, will discuss balancing parenthood and me time during the pandemic and beyond. Time for some me time for me, and I hope for you, Yewande, before your husband and beautiful daughter get back. I hope we can talk again in front of
I hope so too.
And also privately, just you and me eating delicious food.
I would love that.